Okay, so today we are really diving deep into some fascinating stuff. Uh, Malaysia's Medina budget for 2025. We've got excerpts from Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's budget speech. And you know what? This isn't just some dry economic document.
Oh, right.
It's actually a really interesting look into a nation's hopes for the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that budget speeches. They're not just about the numbers, are they? It's about vision. And I think in this case, what's really interesting is how Anwar Ibrahim has actually woven in verses from the Quran, specifically from Surah Al-Baqarah, which talks about, the importance of managing your resources responsibly. And I think that sets a really powerful tone right from the start.
It does. It's like he's saying, we're not just managing an economy here. This is something bigger.
Mm.
And that commitment to the people really comes through, especially when he talks about visiting all these different communities across Malaysia.
Yeah, and those visits, they're more than just photo ops, right? He went to places like Lahad Datu Pasar City, Khadija Kapit, Lor Sitar, and each of those communities are dealing with their own unique challenges. So by putting those stories into his speech, it really grounds the budget in reality. Yeah, he's
Look.
showing that he's in touch with what Malaysians are dealing with every day.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's one thing to read about economic indicators in a report, but it's another thing entirely to hear about, the threat of terrorism in Lahad Datu or the need for infrastructure in Kapit. Remember that story he told about receiving a hand-beaded vest from a woman in Kapit?
Yeah.
That really stuck with me.
It shows a real connection, right? Like a sense of shared purpose. I think that's important. This budget isn't about abstract economic indicators. It's about improving the lives of people. And to do that, they've built this budget on three main pillars: invigorating the economy, generating change, and improving the people's well-being.
3 pillars, each one supporting this vision of a stronger Malaysia. But how does this vision translate into concrete action? That's what I really want to get into.
Yeah, me too. Well, that's where things get really interesting. We need to look at the economic landscape that Anwar Ibrahim is dealing with right now. The achievements, the challenges, and the strategies he's laid out to steer Malaysia towards a brighter future.
So we've got this inspiring vision, right? These 3 pillars for a stronger Malaysia. But every good architect needs to know the lay of the land before they start building, right? So what's the economic reality is Anwar Ibrahim working with here?
Well, he really emphasized a number of positive economic indicators in his speech, strong GDP growth, low unemployment, and they've managed to keep inflation under control.
Okay, so far so good.
Yeah, and there's more. They've seen record foreign investment, the ringgit is strong, and their credit rating is stable, at least according to the major agencies.
Wow, that's actually a pretty enviable position to be in, especially with so much global uncertainty right now. And he even mentioned positive assessments from big names like JP Morgan, HSBC. Even Goldman Sachs is cautiously optimistic about Malaysia's stock market.
Yeah, that's true, but it's that cautiously that kind of stands out to me, right? The global economic climate is definitely something they're going to have to navigate, but it seems like there's a strong belief in Malaysia's resilience.
Okay, so they're acknowledging those global headwinds, but they're not panicking.
Right, and I think their confidence comes from this commitment to reform, building a more sustainable economic model for the long term.
Makes sense. So how does that actually play out? What are they doing to make sure things stay on track?
Well, fiscal responsibility seems to be a big part of it. Anwar Ibrahim was very clear about the need to reduce the deficit and manage the national debt. He even hinted at some potentially unpopular measures to achieve that.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, he brought up the fact that Malaysia's tax revenue as a percentage of GDP is lower than a lot of neighboring countries.
So even with all those positive indicators, they still need to make sure they can fund all these ambitious plans.
Exactly. It's about making sure they can keep this momentum going.
So are we talking about raising taxes then?
It's definitely on the table. He talked about moving towards a more progressive tax system and maybe implementing more targeted subsidies.
So making sure that those who have benefited the most from Malaysia's growth are contributing their fair share while still providing support to those who need it most.
That's the idea. It's about finding that balance between stimulating economic growth and making sure that growth is inclusive and sustainable. And that's where things get really interesting, because this Madonna budget, it's about a lot more than just dollars and cents.
Right. It's about making sure that everyone benefits from these policies.
Absolutely. And it's about good governance, fighting corruption and creating a system that works for everyone in Malaysia.
Yeah, and he seems to be tackling that head on. Based on the speech, it seems like fighting corruption is a big part of that.
Oh, absolutely. Anwar Ibrahim did not mince words when he talked about the importance of good governance. He's talking about increasing funding for the Malaysian Anticorruption Commission,
Okay.
the SPRM implementing this national anti-corruption strategy.
The NACS, right?
Yes, the NACS. And even making amendments to the Audit Act, to make sure that oversight of public funds is stronger.
So it sounds like they're really serious about this,
Yeah.
but it's not just about cracking down, is it? There's also this element of empowerment that I found really interesting. Empowering communities to drive their own economic growth. That Sajati Madani initiative really stood out to me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like instead of taking this top-down approach, they're saying, look, we're going to provide these grants, we're going to provide support to local communities and allow them to drive these projects that address their specific needs.
Right. And he had some great examples in the speech, too. Farmers in Kampung Tabukajidala using drones to improve their farming. The fishing community in Kampung Kuala Babang coming up with these new drying techniques. It's really cool to see this blend of tradition and innovation happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that ties into another major theme of this budget, which is digitalization. They're trying to attract investment from these big tech companies like AWS, Microsoft, Google, and really position Malaysia as this kind of like regional digital hub.
Wow, so they're thinking big.
Yeah.
But they're also, it seems, really aware of the need to balance all this technological progress with sustainability.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they see those things as being interconnected. The budget talks about increasing this ecological fiscal transfer, the EFT, which is a system that sends funds to state governments to support conservation efforts.
Interesting.
They're involving indigenous communities and veterans and safeguarding forests. They're addressing the issue of river pollution. They're really focused on protecting the environment.
So finding that balance between leveraging technology for progress, but not at the expense of the environment.
Exactly. And speaking of balance, let's not forget about food security. That's another key focus.
Right. They're really trying to reduce their reliance on food imports and really boost their domestic agricultural sector.
Exactly. Increase subsidies and aid for farmers and fishermen initiatives to revitalize abandoned agricultural land and measures to control food prices so everyone can afford basic necessities.
It's impressive how they're tying all these different elements together.
It is. It's a very holistic approach.
From fighting corruption to empowering local communities, embracing technology while protecting the environment, ensuring that everyone has access to affordable food.
Yeah.
They're really trying to cover all the bases here.
Yeah, it's ambitious, but, if they can even come close to achieving everything they've laid out in this budget, it could be really transformative for Malaysia.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, here's a final thought for you, our listener. The Matiganai budget aims to balance economic growth with social equity and environmental responsibility. What trade-offs do you think are necessary to achieve that balance, not just in Malaysia, but on a global scale?